It was a crisp Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun spilled golden light across the city, inviting everyone out to bask in its glow. Iris Hudson, a 29-year-old black professional, stepped through the glass doors of a sleek boutique nestled in the heart of downtown. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation. She'd been looking forward to this shopping trip all week, a small reward for her tireless work as a liaison for the mayor's office. Dressed sharply, her purse slung over her shoulder, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd fought for every inch of her success. But as she crossed the threshold, the air shifted. The warmth she expected was nowhere to be found. The boutique was alive with the hum of shoppers, mostly white, Iris noticed, flitting between racks of dresses and shelves of accessories. Sales associates greeted them with bright smiles, offering help with sizes or colors, their voices dripping with hospitality. But for Iris, there was no such welcome. Instead, a store clerk, a young man with a pinched expression, fixed his gaze on her the moment she entered. His eyes narrowed, tracking her every move like a hawk circling prey. Iris felt the weight of his stare, but brushed it off, determined to enjoy her day. She reached for a dress, her fingers brushing the soft fabric, imagining how it might look for an upcoming work event. But before she could even hold it up, the clerk was there, standing too close, his posture rigid with suspicion. He didn't say a word at first, just loomed, his presence a silent accusation. Iris glanced around, noticing other shoppers moving freely, their bags untouched, their steps unshadowed. A woman nearby clutched a designer purse, chatting with a friend, while a man slung a backpack over his shoulder without so much as a glance from the staff. Yet here was Iris, singled out before she'd even had a chance to browse. The clerk finally spoke, his voice low and curt, demanding she hand over her purse. It was company policy, he claimed, though his eyes betrayed something else, something colder, rooted in prejudice. Iris's stomach tightened. She wanted to argue, to point out the obvious unfairness, but she sensed the eyes of other shoppers turning toward her, their curiosity tinged with judgment. Reluctantly, she handed over her bag, her fingers lingering on the strap, as if letting go meant surrendering more than just her belongings. With her purse now behind the counter, Iris tried to focus on shopping, but the clerk's shadow followed her. Every step she took, he was there, hovering just a few feet away, his gaze boring into her back. She picked up a dress, then another, trying to lose herself in the colors and textures, but the weight of his scrutiny was suffocating. Other shoppers whispered, their glances darting between Iris and the clerk, as if she was some spectacle to be dissected. Her cheeks burned with a mix of embarrassment and anger. She'd faced moments like this before. Those subtle, cutting slights that reminded her of her place in a world that often saw her skin before her humanity. But this was different. This was blatant, deliberate, and it was only getting worse. The clerk's supervisor, a woman with a sharp bob and an even sharper demeanor, appeared from the back. Iris saw an opportunity to set things right. She straightened her shoulders, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her, and explained the situation. The unfair demand for her bag, the relentless tailing, the way she was being treated like a thief before she'd done anything wrong. She expected understanding, or at least a professional response. Instead, the manager's lips curled into a faint, dismissive smile. She brushed off Iris's concerns, insisting it was all standard procedure, nothing personal. But her tone dripped with condescension, and her eyes suggested otherwise. Iris's heart pounded. This wasn't just about a bag anymore. It was about her dignity, her right to exist in this space without being reduced to a stereotype. The manager's dismissal only emboldened the clerk. He stepped closer, his voice taking on a harder edge, suggesting that if Iris had nothing to hide, she wouldn't mind their scrutiny. The implication was clear. They didn't trust her, not because of anything she'd done, but because of who she was. Iris's anger flared, but she held it in check, her mind racing for a way out. She demanded her bag back, ready to walk away from this humiliation. But the manager's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. She wasn't letting Iris go that easily. In a swift, almost theatrical move, she ordered the store cleared of other customers, claiming an emergency situation. The announcement crackled over the PA system, and shoppers shuffled out, casting curious glances over their shoulders. The boutique, once bustling, was now a silent stage, with Iris at its center. Alone with the clerk and manager, Iris felt the walls closing in. The manager's voice grew sharper, more commanding. They needed to check her, she said, not just her bag, but her. They wanted her to undress, right there in the store, to prove she wasn't hiding anything. The words hit Iris like a slap. Her breath caught in her throat, her mind reeling at the audacity, the violation. She refused, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance, but the manager was unmoved. If Iris wouldn't comply, they'd call the police. The threat hung in the air like a guillotine, and Iris's heart sank. She wasn't just being humiliated, she was being cornered, stripped of her agency in a place that should have been safe. The clerk pulled out his phone, dialing with a smugness that made Iris's skin crawl. The manager stood by, arms crossed, her expression daring Iris to resist further. The sound of sirens began to creep through the windows, growing louder with each passing second. Iris stood frozen, her mind a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. She'd come here to shop, to enjoy a simple moment of normalcy, and now she was being treated like a criminal for no reason other than the color of her skin. The injustice burned, a fire that threatened to consume her, but beneath it was something else. A spark of resilience, a refusal to break. Iris Hudson wasn't just any woman. She was a fighter, a professional with connections that reached far beyond this boutique. And as the sirens grew closer, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. The door swung open, and a police officer stepped inside, his presence filling the room with a new kind of tension. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but his eyes were cold, already fixed on Iris with a presumption of guilt. The manager and clerk exchanged satisfied glances, as if their trap had snapped shut. But Iris wasn't done. She stood tall, her heart pounding but her resolve unbroken, ready to face whatever came next. The officer's arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where the stakes would rise, and the truth would start to claw its way to the surface. If this story's got you fired up, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. Iris's fight is just beginning, and trust me, you won't believe how she turns this nightmare around. To understand why this moment hit Iris so hard, we have to go back. Iris Hudson wasn't just a shopper caught in a bad situation. She was a 29-year-old black woman who'd spent her life navigating a world that often tried to diminish her. As a liaison for the mayor's office, she'd built a career on resilience and smarts, forging connections that carried weight. But on this day, all of that was stripped away, leaving her to face a system rigged against her. What happened next would test her like never before. The boutique stood eerily silent, its racks of dresses and shelves of accessories frozen in the wake of the manager's abrupt order to clear the store. Iris Hudson, a 29-year-old black professional, stood alone in the center of the polished floor, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The warmth of the Saturday afternoon sun, filtering through the windows, felt like a distant memory now, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She'd come here to shop, to enjoy a fleeting moment of normalcy, but instead, she'd been singled out, her purse confiscated, her every move shadowed by suspicion. The store clerk and manager stood nearby, their eyes gleaming with a smug certainty that they'd cornered her. But the worst was yet to come. The sound of sirens, faint at first, grew louder, slicing through the quiet like a blade. Iris's breath caught as the door swung open, and a new figure stepped into the frame. A man whose presence would turn her nightmare into something far uglier. Officer Pierce was a towering figure, his white shirt crisp and his badge glinting under the boutique's fluorescent lights. His reputation preceded him, whispered in the community as a cop with a short fuse and a long history of aggression. His boots thudded against the floor as he strode in, his gaze locking onto Iris with a cold, predatory focus. There was no hesitation in his step, no trace of the impartiality you'd expect from an officer of the law. To him, Iris wasn't a person with rights or a story. She was a problem, a suspect, a target. The manager and clerk exchanged quick glances, their postures relaxing, as if his arrival guaranteed their victory. Iris, however, felt the air grow heavier, the weight of their collective judgment pressing down on her like a physical force. Without so much as a greeting, Pierce moved toward Iris, his broad frame casting a shadow over her. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned her from head to toe, not with curiosity, but with presumption. He didn't ask for her side of the story, didn't inquire about the accusations the manager had hurled over the phone. Instead, he barked an order for her to step aside, his voice carrying the weight of authority and disdain. Iris's stomach twisted. She'd faced prejudice before, those subtle slights that stung but could be brushed off. But this was different. This was raw, unfiltered, and backed by a badge. She stood her ground, her shoulders squared, her eyes meeting his with a defiance born of years navigating a world that often tried to diminish her. But inside, her heart ached, a mix of anger and fear swirling as she realized how quickly this situation was spiraling out of control. Pierce didn't wait for her to comply. He gestured toward a corner of the store, his movements sharp and commanding, as if her presence alone offended him. The manager stepped forward, her voice low but eager, feeding him a narrative of suspicion, claims of theft, vague insinuations about Iris's behavior. There was no evidence, no proof, just the word of a clerk who'd followed her every step and a manager who'd dismissed her complaints with a smirk. Yet Pierce latched onto their story without question, his face hardening as if Iris's guilt was a foregone conclusion. He didn't see a professional woman who'd walked into a boutique to shop. He saw a stereotype, a threat to be neutralized. The injustice burned in Iris's chest, a fire that threatened to choke her. She wanted to scream, to demand fairness, but she knew that raising her voice now might only tighten the noose they were weaving around her. Iris tried to reason with him, her words measured despite the tremor in her hands. She explained that she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd been singled out from the moment she walked in, that the demand for her bag was unfair when other shoppers roamed freely. Her voice carried the weight of her truth, a plea for him to see her as a person, not a suspect. But Pierce's expression didn't soften. If anything, her words seemed to irritate him, like an inconvenience he had no patience for. He cut her off, his tone sharp, dismissing her explanations as irrelevant. He wasn't here to listen, he was here to act. With a flick of his wrist, he demanded her purse, insisting on searching it himself. Iris's heart sank. Her bag, already taken from her at the door, was now in his hands, a symbol of her dwindling control. She stood there, exposed, as he rifled through her belongings, his movements rough and careless, as if her privacy meant nothing. The boutique's fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder, amplifying the tension that hung in the air. The clerk and manager watched from a few feet away, their faces a mix of satisfaction and anticipation, as if they knew what was coming. Iris's mind raced. She'd been humiliated enough, stripped of her dignity, followed like a criminal, forced to justify her existence in a place where she should have been just another customer. But Pierce wasn't done. His eyes narrowed as he set her purse down, his lips curling into a grimace. The bag wasn't enough, he declared. It wasn't enough to prove her innocence, to satisfy whatever twisted narrative he'd already bought into. He wanted more. He wanted her searched, physically, personally, in a way that would strip away what little dignity she had left. The words hit Iris like a punch, stealing her breath, leaving her frozen in a moment of pure, visceral horror. The manager nodded in agreement, her earlier smirk returning, as if this was the natural next step. The clerk shifted his weight, his eyes gleaming with a cruel kind of curiosity. Iris felt the walls of the boutique closing in, the space shrinking until it was just her, Pierce, and the weight of their accusations. Her heart pounded, a mix of rage and helplessness surging through her veins. She'd walked into this store with hope, with the simple desire to treat herself, and now she was being reduced to nothing. A suspect, a spectacle, a target for their prejudice. The sirens outside had faded, but the threat they carried stood before her now, in the form of a man who saw her not as Iris Hudson, liaison to the mayor's office, but as someone to be controlled, humiliated, broken. Yet even in this moment, Iris's spirit didn't waver. Beneath the fear, beneath the anger, there was a spark, a fire that had carried her through every challenge life had thrown her way. She was more than this moment, more than their accusations. She was a woman who'd built a career against the odds, who'd forged connections that reached far beyond this boutique's walls. As Pierce's demand hung in the air, Iris's mind raced, searching for a way to fight back, to reclaim her power. The cliffhanger loomed, a moment where everything could change. What happened next would push her to the edge, but it would also set the stage for a reckoning no one in that store could foresee. If this injustice has your blood boiling, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. Iris is down, but she's far from out, and the storm she's about to unleash will leave you speechless. To understand why Iris refused to break, we need to look deeper. She wasn't just fighting for herself in that boutique. She was fighting for every moment she'd been underestimated, every time she'd been forced to prove her worth. As a black woman in a high-profile role, Iris had learned to navigate spaces where she was often the only one who looked like her. But this encounter, this blatant assault on her dignity, was about to push her to a breaking point, and reveal a strength that would change everything. The boutique, once a vibrant hub of chatter and clinking hangers, had become a stage for a nightmare. Iris Hudson stood in the center of it all, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath shallow as the weight of injustice pressed down on her. The store was no longer empty. Shoppers had trickled back in, drawn by the spectacle of flashing police lights and whispered rumors of trouble. Their eyes, curious and judgmental, formed a silent jury around Iris, a 29-year-old black professional who'd walked into this boutique with nothing but the hope of finding a new dress. Now she was trapped, surrounded by the store manager, the clerk, and Officer Pierce, a white cop whose cold gaze and aggressive demeanor had already marked her as guilty. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your chest tighten. Iris's dignity, already battered by the confiscation of her purse and the relentless suspicion, was about to face its cruelest test yet. Officer Pierce stood towering over her, his badge glinting like a weapon under the boutique's harsh fluorescent lights. His presence was a storm cloud, dark and unyielding, his authority wielded like a club. Without a shred of evidence, Without even pretending to consider her side, he'd already searched her purse, tossing her personal belongings aside as if they were trash. But that wasn't enough for him. His eyes, cold and unfeeling, fixed on Iris with a look that stripped her of her humanity. He pointed to a fitting area at the far end of the store, a small, curtained alcove meant for privacy, and ordered her to move. But there was a catch, a twist that turned Iris's stomach and sent a chill down her spine. The curtain, he declared, would stay wide open. The shoppers, the staff, the world, they'd all see everything. Iris's breath caught, her mind reeling at the sheer audacity of the demand. This wasn't justice. This was humiliation, deliberate and public, designed to break her. The crowd of onlookers grew, their murmurs a low hum that buzzed in Iris's ears like a swarm of insects. Some stood with arms crossed, their faces etched with suspicion, already convinced she was the thief the staff claimed her to be. Others looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting away, but they stayed, drawn to the drama unfolding before them. The store manager, her lips curled into a faint, triumphant smirk, stood beside the clerk, whose own expression carried a cruel amusement. They watched Iris like vultures circling a wounded animal, their confidence bolstered by Pierce's presence. Iris's heart pounded, a mix of rage and fear surging through her veins. She was a professional, a liaison for the mayor's office, a woman who'd fought her way through countless barriers. Yet here, in this boutique, she was being reduced to nothing, a spectacle for strangers, a target for their prejudice. Pierce's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and commanding, as he ordered Iris to undress. Piece by piece, he said, as if she were a criminal whose every layer needed to be peeled back to expose some imagined guilt. The words hit her like a physical blow, each one a stab at her dignity. Iris's hands trembled, her mind screaming in protest. She tried to resist, her body stiffening, her eyes locking onto Pierce's with a fire that refused to be extinguished. She wasn't a thief, wasn't a criminal. She was a woman who'd done nothing wrong, targeted for no reason other than the color of her skin. But Pierce was unmoved, his face a mask of authority and contempt. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a menacing growl, and warned her that refusal meant arrest. The threat hung heavy, a chain tightening around her, leaving her with an impossible choice. Comply and lose her dignity, or resist and risk everything. The shopper's eyes bore into her, their whispers growing louder, a chorus of judgment that echoed in her ears. Iris felt the weight of their stares, each one a reminder of her isolation, her vulnerability. She was alone in this moment, surrounded by people who saw her not as Iris Hudson, but as a stereotype, a problem to be dealt with. The manager's smirk widened, the clerk's amusement now a full grin, as if they were savoring her discomfort. Iris's chest tightened, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She wanted to run, to scream, to tear down the walls of this boutique and expose the injustice for what it was. But Pierce's presence, his badge, his power, held her in place. With a heavy heart, she stepped toward the fitting area, the open curtain looming like a guillotine. As she began to comply, removing her jacket, then her blouse, the humiliation reached its peak. The crowd watched, some with pity, others with disdain, their phones now raised, capturing every moment of her degradation. Iris stood in her undergarments, her skin exposed to the cold air and colder stares, her dignity stripped away in a way that cut deeper than any physical wound. The manager whispered something to the clerk, their laughter a sharp, cruel sound that pierced Iris's heart. She felt small, exposed, dehumanized, a woman reduced to a spectacle for the entertainment of strangers. Yet even in this moment, a spark of defiance burned within her. She was not broken. She was Iris Hudson, and she would not let them define her. But the nightmare wasn't over. As Iris stood there, vulnerable and humiliated, the manager's hand darted toward her purse, which Pierce had left on a nearby counter. With a theatrical flourish, she pulled out an item, a small, expensive trinket from the store's shelves. Her voice rang out, loud enough for the crowd to hear, declaring it stolen, proof of Iris's guilt. The clerk nodded eagerly, backing her up, their faces alight with triumph. The crowd gasped, their murmurs turning to accusations, their phones still recording, immortalizing the lie. Iris's heart stopped. She knew the truth. That item wasn't hers, had never been in her possession. It was a setup, a cruel frame job designed to justify their actions, to cement her as the villain they'd already decided she was. Her eyes widened, her body trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief, as the weight of their deception settled over her. Pierce turned to her, his expression one of grim satisfaction, as if this discovery confirmed everything he'd assumed. The shopper's whispers grew louder, their judgment now a roar in Iris's ears. She was trapped, cornered by a lie, her dignity in tatters, her innocence dismissed. But beneath the pain, beneath the humiliation, that spark of resilience flickered brighter. Iris Hudson was more than this moment, more than their accusations. She was a fighter, a woman with connections, and a will that refused to bend. As the manager held up the stolen item and Pierce's hand moved toward his handcuffs, Iris's mind raced, searching for a way to turn the tide. The cliffhanger loomed, a moment where everything hung in the balance, setting the stage for a reckoning that would shake this boutique to its core. To understand how Iris held on to her strength in this moment, we have to look at the fire within her. She wasn't just a victim of a cruel setup. She was a woman who'd spent her life proving herself in a world that often refused to see her. As a black professional, a liaison for the mayor's office, Iris had faced countless obstacles, each one forging her into someone unbreakable. What happened next would test that strength to its limits, and reveal a power no one in that boutique could have anticipated. The boutique was a cauldron of tension, its air thick with the weight of injustice. Iris Hudson stood in the fitting area, her body exposed in her undergarments, her dignity shredded by the relentless demands of Officer Pierce and the smirking complicity of the store manager and clerk. The crowd of shoppers, drawn back by the spectacle of flashing police lights, formed a ring around her, their eyes a mix of curiosity, pity, and judgment. Phones were raised, their tiny lenses capturing every moment of Iris's humiliation, turning her private nightmare into a public spectacle. The 29-year-old black professional, who'd walked into this boutique with the simple hope of finding a dress, was now a target, stripped of her agency, and reduced to a figure in a cruel drama. The stolen item, a small, glittering trinket, dangled from the manager's hand, a lie masquerading as evidence, sealing Iris's fate in the eyes of those who'd already judged her. But the worst was yet to come, as the trap tightened around her, threatening to crush the last of her resolve. The manager's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd, sharp and theatrical, as she declared the boutique's security cameras conveniently down, due to a mysterious power surge. Her words were smooth, rehearsed, a perfect alibi for the absence of any footage that might contradict their story. The clerk nodded in agreement, his face a mask of feigned concern, but his eyes betrayed a glint of triumph. They'd orchestrated this moment, planting the trinket in Iris's purse, and now they were closing the noose with a lie that left no room for her defense. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a chorus of doubt and accusation that echoed in Iris's ears like a rising storm. Some shoppers shook their heads, their faces hardening as they bought into the manager's narrative. Others hesitated, their expressions uneasy, but they did nothing to intervene, their silence a complicity of its own. Iris's heart sank, the weight of their judgment pressing down on her, a physical force that threatened to suffocate her. Officer Pierce seized on the planted evidence with a predatory zeal, his broad frame looming over Iris as he held up the trinket for all to see. His voice was loud, authoritative, branding her a thief without a shred of hesitation. The word hit Iris like a slap, its sting sharper than the cold air against her exposed skin. She was no thief. She'd done nothing but walk into this store, a black woman in a space that had decided her guilt the moment she arrived. Yet Pierce's accusation carried the weight of his badge, his authority, his whiteness, and it crushed any hope of fairness. The crowd's murmurs swelled, some shoppers now openly pointing, their phones still recording, capturing the moment Iris's life was being rewritten by a lie. Her chest tightened, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the reality of the frame job settled over her like a dark cloud. They weren't just humiliating her. They were framing her, building a case to destroy her. Iris's knees trembled, her body betraying the storm raging inside her. For a moment, she broke, the weight of the injustice too much to bear. Tears stung her eyes, not from weakness but from the raw, searing pain of being targeted, dehumanized, and betrayed. She'd faced prejudice before, those subtle cuts that accumulated over time, but this was a wound unlike any other. It was deliberate, calculated, a conspiracy between the manager, the clerk, and now Pierce, all working in tandem to strip her of her identity and paint her as a criminal. The shoppers' phones, their unblinking lenses, immortalized her vulnerability, turning her into a spectacle for the world to judge. Some in the crowd whispered words of sympathy, their faces softening as they sensed the wrongness of the scene, but their voices were drowned out by those who'd already condemned her. Iris felt alone, exposed, her heart a battlefield of anger and despair. Yet even in this moment of collapse, Iris's spirit flickered, a faint but stubborn flame. She was a liaison for the mayor's office, a woman who'd climbed through barriers of prejudice to carve out a place for herself. She'd faced rooms where she was the only black face, meetings where her voice was dismissed, and still she'd risen. This boutique, this moment, was not the end of her story. As Pierce's accusations echoed, as the manager's smirk widened and the clerk's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, Iris's mind began to fight back. She saw the lie for what it was, a setup, a frame job designed to justify their prejudice. Her tears dried, replaced by a burning resolve to expose the truth, to turn this moment of humiliation into something they couldn't control. But the odds were stacked against her, and the danger was far from over. Pierce's hand moved to his belt, his fingers closing around the cold metal of his handcuffs. The crowd's murmurs hushed, a collective intake of breath as the moment grew heavier. He stepped closer to Iris, his boots thudding against the polished floor, his eyes locked on hers with a chilling certainty. He was ready to take her to jail, to seal her fate with the weight of his authority. The manager and clerk stood by, their faces alight with victory, as if they'd won some twisted game. The shoppers' phones kept rolling, capturing the moment Iris's freedom hung in the balance. Some in the crowd looked away, unable to stomach the injustice, but others leaned in, drawn to the drama, their judgment a silent accomplice. Iris's heart pounded, her body still trembling from the humiliation of standing half-dressed in front of strangers, but her mind was racing. She was trapped, cornered, but not defeated. Something within her, a spark of defiance, a whisper of power, was ready to ignite. The boutique's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness of the moment. Pierce's hand tightened on the handcuffs, the metal glinting as he prepared to bind Iris's wrists and march her out of the store. The crowd watched, their phones a relentless record of her lowest moment. The manager's smirk was now a full grin, the clerk's eyes dancing with cruel amusement. Iris stood on the edge, her dignity in tatters, her innocence buried under a lie. But she was Iris Hudson, a woman who'd never let the world define her. As Pierce raised the handcuffs, as the crowd held its breath, the cliffhanger loomed. A moment where everything could change, where Iris's fight was about to take a turn no one in that boutique could predict. Iris had spent her life defying expectations, proving herself in a world that often tried to silence her. As a black woman, a professional, a liaison for the mayor's office, Iris had built a life on resilience. But this frame job, this cruel conspiracy, was pushing her to the brink and setting the stage for a rebellion that would shake the foundations of this injustice. The boutique was a crucible of injustice, its polished floors reflecting the harsh glare of fluorescent lights and the darker glow of prejudice. Iris Hudson stood at its center, her body trembling from the ordeal of being publicly stripped to her undergarments, her dignity torn apart by a false accusation. The stolen trinket, planted in her purse by the scheming store manager, dangled like a noose in Officer Pierce's hand, his face a mask of grim satisfaction as he branded her a thief. The crowd of shoppers, their phones raised like weapons, captured every moment of her humiliation, their murmurs a mix of accusation and unease. The manager and clerk stood nearby, their smirks a silent celebration of their frame job, their confidence bolstered by Pierce's authority. Iris, a 29-year-old black professional, was at her breaking point, her heart a battlefield of rage, despair, and a flicker of defiance that refused to die. But this moment, this suffocating, dehumanizing moment, was about to spark a rebellion within her, a refusal to let them silence her voice. Iris's tears had dried, replaced by a fire that burned in her chest. She was no thief, no criminal. She was a woman targeted for the color of her skin, caught in a web of lies spun by a manager, a clerk, and a cop who saw her as less than human. The weight of their accusations, the crowd's judgment, the violation of her body and privacy. It was all too much, yet it was also the fuel that ignited her resolve. She straightened her shoulders, her eyes blazing with a strength that had carried her through countless battles. She wasn't just Iris Hudson, liaison to the mayor's office. She was a warrior, a woman who'd faced prejudice head-on and refused to bow. Her mind raced, piecing together the injustice, the planted evidence, the convenient power surge that disabled the cameras, the rush to condemn her without proof. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a deliberate attack, and she would not let it stand unchallenged. With a voice that trembled but never wavered, Iris demanded justice. She insisted they check the store's official systems, the records that would show she'd done nothing wrong. She pointed to the cameras, knowing their claim of a power surge was a lie, a flimsy excuse to cover their tracks. Her words were a clarion call, cutting through the haze of accusation, exposing the truth they tried to bury. She didn't stop there. She named the real reason for their actions, the ugly truth they refused to acknowledge. She was being targeted because she was black, singled out in a way no other shopper had been, her every move scrutinized, her dignity stripped away for no reason other than the color of her skin. The words hung in the air, raw and unapologetic, a challenge to the manager, the clerk, and Pierce, who stood before her with his handcuffs glinting, ready to drag her away. Pierce's reaction was swift and vicious, his face twisting into a sneer as he dismissed her plea with a cruelty that cut deeper than any physical blow. He mocked her, his voice dripping with contempt, accusing her of pulling the race card, as if her pain, her truth, was nothing more than a tired cliché. The words were a slap, a dismissal of her lived experience, a weapon meant to silence her. The manager and clerk, emboldened by his support, nodded in agreement, their smirks widening as if his words validated their actions. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some shoppers shaking their heads, their phones still recording, capturing the moment Iris's truth was twisted into a caricature. Others in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flickering with doubt, but they remained silent, their inaction a quiet complicity in the injustice unfolding before them. Iris's heart pounded, her body still trembling from the humiliation of standing half-dressed in front of strangers, but her spirit refused to break. The mockery, the nods, the crowd's judgment, they were all part of the same system that had tried to diminish her for years. But Iris was no stranger to fighting back. She'd built a career in rooms where she was the only black face, faced down skepticism and bias with a strength forged in fire. This moment, as crushing as it was not the end. Her mind raced, searching for a way to turn the tide, to expose the lie that held her captive. The manager's smugness, the clerk's cruel amusement, Pierce's sneering dismissal. They thought they had her cornered, but Iris Hudson was not one to stay down. She felt a spark of desperation, yes, but also a surge of power, a realization that she had something they didn't expect, a weapon they couldn't anticipate. As Pierce raised the handcuffs, his boots thudding against the floor, ready to bind her wrists and march her to jail, Iris's hand moved to her pocket. The crowd's murmurs hushed, their eyes widening as they sensed a shift in the air. The manager's smirk faltered, the clerk's grin froze, and even Pierce paused, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Iris's fingers closed around her phone, her lifeline in this moment of desperation. She wasn't reaching for family, for comfort. She was reaching for something far more powerful. Her heart raced, not with fear but with purpose, as she prepared to make a call that would change everything. The boutique's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the crowd's phones still rolling, capturing the moment Iris stood on the edge of a precipice. She was cornered, humiliated, framed, but she was not defeated. The cliffhanger loomed, a moment where the tide could turn, where Iris's defiance was about to ignite a fire no one in that store could contain. Iris is a black woman who'd spent her life defying the odds, a professional who'd carved out a place in a world that often tried to shut her out. As a liaison for the mayor's office, Iris had connections, knowledge, and a resilience that ran deeper than anyone in that boutique could imagine. This call wasn't just a desperate act. It was a calculated strike, the beginning of a reckoning that would turn the tables in ways they never saw coming. The boutique had become a pressure cooker, its air thick with the stench of injustice and the electric hum of anticipation. Iris Hudson stood at the heart of it, her body still trembling from the ordeal of being publicly stripped to her undergarments, her purse defiled by a planted trinket, her name slandered as a thief. The crowd of shoppers, their phones raised like a modern-day Colosseum, recorded every moment of her humiliation, their murmurs a mix of accusation and unease. Officer Pierce loomed before her, his handcuffs glinting, his face a mask of smug certainty as he prepared to drag her to jail. The store manager and clerk stood nearby, their smirks a silent victory, their confidence unshaken by Iris's defiant demands for justice. But Iris, a 29-year-old black professional, was no ordinary woman. Her hand clutched her phone, her lifeline, and in that moment of desperation, she was about to unleash a power that would turn this nightmare on its head. Iris's fingers moved with purpose, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a fierce, unyielding resolve. She wasn't reaching for comfort or escape. She was reaching for justice, for a connection that could shatter the trap they'd built around her. Her eyes, still burning with the fire of defiance, locked onto Pierce, daring him to stop her as she raised the phone to her ear. The crowd's murmurs hushed, their phones still rolling, capturing the shift in the air. The manager's smirk faltered, the clerk's grin froze, and even Pierce's hand paused on his handcuffs, his eyes narrowing with a flicker of unease. Iris's call connected, and she demanded it be put on speaker, her voice cutting through the boutique's oppressive silence like a blade. The crowd leaned in, their breath held, as the sound of a ringing phone echoed through the store, a harbinger of something monumental. The line clicked, and a voice answered, not just any voice, but one that carried the weight of authority, sharp and commanding. Iris stood taller, her shoulders squared, as she introduced herself with a calm that belied the storm she'd endured. She was Iris Hudson, liaison to the mayor's office, a woman whose name carried power in circles far beyond this boutique's walls. Gasps rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock that broke their judgmental silence. Shoppers exchanged glances, their phones wavering as they processed the revelation. The manager's face drained of color, her smirk replaced by a flicker of panic. The clerk's eyes widened, his earlier amusement crumbling under the weight of Iris's words. Pierce's jaw tightened, his hands still clutching the handcuffs, but a shadow of doubt crossed his face for the first time. Iris didn't stop there. Her voice, steady and unyielding, cut deeper as she reminded Pierce of the district attorney's anti-corruption task force, a name that struck like lightning in the room. The task force was no secret in the city, a relentless force known for rooting out abuse, particularly among those who hid behind badges. The crowd's gasps grew louder, their phones now capturing a different kind of drama, one where the hunter was becoming the hunted. The manager and clerk shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence evaporating as Iris's words hung in the air, a challenge they couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a woman they'd framed. She was a force, a professional with connections that could unravel their lies in an instant. The voice on the phone sharpened, cutting through the boutique's tension like a scalpel. The district attorney himself came on the line, his tone clipped and authoritative, confirming Iris's identity with a clarity that left no room for doubt. The sheriff's voice followed, equally sharp, echoing through the speaker for all to hear. They knew Iris Hudson, not as a thief, not as a suspect, but as a respected professional, a liaison whose work touched the highest levels of the city's government. The crowd's murmurs turned to whispers of disbelief, some shoppers lowering their phones, their faces flushed with shame for their earlier judgments. The manager's hands trembled, her eyes darting to the clerk, who now stood frozen, his bravado gone. Pierce's face hardened, but the flicker of doubt in his eyes grew into something more. A realization that he'd miscalculated, that his authority was no longer absolute. The boutique's fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder, casting harsh shadows on a scene that was shifting before everyone's eyes. Iris stood at the center, her phone a beacon of truth, her presence a testament to her resilience. She'd been humiliated, stripped, framed, mocked, but she was not broken. The crowd watched, their phones still rolling, but now they captured a woman reclaiming her power, a woman who'd turned their accusations into a mirror reflecting their own guilt. The manager and clerk shrank back, their earlier smugness replaced by a dawning fear. Pierce's hand tightened on the handcuffs, his knuckles white, as if clinging to the last vestiges of his control. But the voices on the phone were relentless, their authority dwarfing his own. Then came the moment that stopped the room cold. The sheriff's voice, sharp and unyielding, issued a command that echoed through the boutique like a thunderclap. Officer Pierce was to remove his badge and gun, effective immediately. The words hung in the air, a seismic shift that sent shockwaves through the crowd. Gasps turned to stunned silence, the shoppers' phones wavering as they captured the unthinkable. A cop, stripped of his power in real time. Pierce's face froze, his eyes wide with disbelief, his hand falling away from the handcuffs. The manager and clerk stood rooted, their faces pale, their earlier triumph now a distant memory. Iris stood tall, her phone still raised, her eyes blazing with a fire that had burned through her pain and emerged as something unstoppable. The boutique was no longer a stage for Iris's humiliation. It was a battleground where truth was beginning to prevail. The crowd's whispers grew again, but now they carried a different tone: admiration, awe, and a growing sense of justice. Some shoppers lowered their phones, their faces softened by the realization of what they'd witnessed. Others kept recording, capturing the moment a black woman, targeted and framed, turned the tables with a single call. Iris's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a fierce, rising elation. She'd been pushed to the edge, stripped of her dignity, but she'd fought back with a strength that came from years of defying a world that tried to diminish her. The cliffhanger loomed, a moment where the power dynamic flipped, where Pierce's fall was just the beginning of a reckoning that would shake this boutique to its core. If Iris's incredible comeback has you cheering, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. She's turned the tables, but the fight isn't over, and the fallout from this moment will leave you speechless. To understand the magnitude of Iris's stand, we have to see her not just as a woman making a call, but as a force of resilience. As a black professional, a liaison for the mayor's office, Iris had spent her life navigating spaces where she was often underestimated, her voice dismissed. But this moment, this call, was the culmination of every battle she'd fought, every barrier she'd broken. What happened next would take her fight beyond this boutique, exposing a system that had tried to silence her, and proving that her voice was louder than they ever imagined. The boutique, once a stage for Iris Hudson's public humiliation, had transformed into an arena of reckoning. The air crackled with shock, the kind that ripples through a crowd when the impossible becomes reality. Moments ago, Iris, a 29-year-old black professional, stood exposed in her undergarments, framed as a thief by a planted trinket, her dignity shredded by Officer Pierce's cruel demands and the store manager's smirking lies. The crowd of shoppers, their phones raised like torches, had captured every moment of her degradation, their murmurs a mix of judgment and unease. But Iris's call to the district attorney's office had flipped the script, her voice summoning a power that shook the boutique's foundations. The sheriff's voice, sharp and authoritative, had just delivered a command that froze the room. Officer Pierce was to remove his badge and gun, effective immediately. The tables had turned, and the shockwave was only beginning to spread. Pierce stood rooted to the spot, his broad frame suddenly diminished, his badge no longer a shield but a weight pulling him down. His face, once a mask of smug certainty, was now a canvas of disbelief, his eyes wide with the realization that his authority had crumbled. The handcuffs he'd held, ready to bind Iris's wrists, hung limp in his hand, a symbol of his own impending fall. The crowd's gasps echoed through the boutique, their phones still rolling, capturing the moment a cop who'd stripped Iris of her dignity was stripped of his power in front of everyone. Some shoppers lowered their devices, their faces flushed with shame for their earlier assumptions, while others leaned in, their lenses trained on Pierce, recording the downfall of a man who'd wielded his badge like a weapon. The store manager, her earlier smirk wiped away, stumbled over herself in a frantic attempt to backpedal. Her hands fluttered, her face pale as she spun a tale of misunderstanding, claiming the entire ordeal was a mistake, a mix-up, nothing more. Her voice trembled, betraying the lie, as she tried to distance herself from the framed job she'd orchestrated. The clerk, who'd grinned with cruel amusement as Iris was humiliated, now shrank back, his eyes darting nervously between the manager and Pierce, his bravado gone. Their attempts to rewrite the narrative fell flat, their words drowned out by the crowd's shifting energy. The shoppers, once a silent jury condemning Iris, now turned their gaze to the manager and clerk, their whispers carrying a new tone: disgust, realization, and a demand for accountability. Iris stood at the center of it all, her heart still pounding from the ordeal, but her spirit blazing with a fire that refused to be extinguished. She was no longer the vulnerable woman standing half-dressed in a fitting area, no longer the target of their lies. She was Iris Hudson, liaison to the mayor's office, a black woman who'd faced down prejudice and emerged stronger every time. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the crowd, the manager, the clerk, and Pierce, whose power now lay in ruins at her feet. She stepped forward, her presence commanding, her resolve a beacon in the boutique's harsh light. She didn't need words to confront them. Her stance, her gaze, her unbroken spirit said it all. She reminded everyone, with every fiber of her being, that humiliation was unforgettable, that the pain they'd inflicted could not be erased by their feeble excuses. The crowd's phones kept rolling, capturing every second of this seismic shift. Some shoppers, their faces softened by empathy, nodded in silent support, their earlier judgment replaced by admiration. Others, still gripped by the drama, recorded the manager's floundering, the clerk's panic, Pierce's stunned silence. The boutique's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows on a scene that had flipped from injustice to justice in a matter of moments. Iris's confrontation wasn't just about her. It was a stand for every person who'd been targeted, diminished, or silenced by a system that thrived on prejudice. Her presence, her refusal to break, was a living rebuke to those who'd tried to crush her, a testament to the power of resilience in the face of cruelty. Pierce's hand moved slowly, almost mechanically, as he unclipped his badge, the metal glinting one last time before he set it down. His gun followed, its weight heavy in the silence, a symbol of his authority now stripped away. The crowd watched, their phones immortalizing the moment a man who'd wielded power so recklessly was brought low. The manager's backpedaling grew more desperate, her voice rising in a futile attempt to salvage her position. But the crowd's eyes were on Iris, their phones now a tool of justice rather than judgment. The clerk stood frozen, his earlier amusement replaced by a dawning fear of consequences. Iris's heart swelled, not with vengeance but with a fierce, righteous elation. She'd been pushed to the edge, humiliated, framed, mocked. But she'd fought back, and now the world was seeing the truth. But the reckoning wasn't over. The sheriff's voice crackled through the phone still on speaker, its authority cutting through the boutique like a blade. The investigation, he declared, was just beginning, not into Iris, but into Pierce, the manager, and the clerk. The words landed like a thunderbolt, sending a fresh wave of shock through the crowd. The shoppers' murmurs turned to gasps, their phones capturing the promise of accountability, the assurance that this injustice would not go unpunished. The manager's face crumpled, her excuses dissolving into panic. The clerk's eyes darted to the exit, as if he could escape the consequences now closing in. Pierce stood silent, his badge and gun gone, his power stripped, his future uncertain. Iris stood tall, her eyes blazing with a strength that had carried her through this nightmare, and now shone brighter than ever. The boutique was no longer a place of humiliation. It was a battleground where truth had prevailed, where Iris's courage had turned the tables on those who'd sought to destroy her. The crowd's phones, once weapons of her degradation, now recorded a victory, a moment where a black woman's voice had shattered a system of lies. Iris's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a soaring sense of triumph. She'd been targeted, stripped, framed, but she'd risen, her resilience a beacon for all who watched. The cliffhanger loomed, a promise of justice that would ripple far beyond this boutique, a vow that the investigation would uncover every layer of this injustice and hold those responsible to account. Iris is more than a woman who made a call. She is a black professional, a liaison for the mayor's office, a warrior who'd spent her life defying a world that tried to silence her. This victory wasn't just hers. It was a spark that would ignite a larger fight, a movement that would ripple through the city and beyond. What happened next would take this battle to new heights, exposing a system that had tried to crush her and proving that her voice was unstoppable. The boutique, once a glittering showcase of fashion, had become a battleground where truth had triumphed over injustice. Iris Hudson, a 29-year-old black professional, stood at the heart of that victory, her courage having turned the tables on those who'd sought to humiliate her. Moments ago, Officer Pierce, the cop who'd stripped her of her dignity, had been stripped of his badge and gun, his authority crumbling under the weight of a call to the district attorney's office. The store manager and clerk, their smirks replaced by panic, faced the promise of a sheriff's investigation, their lies exposed in front of a crowd whose phones had captured every second. The air in the boutique still buzzed with the shock of Iris's stand, but the story was no longer confined to those four walls. It was spreading, a spark igniting a fire that would burn far beyond the boutique, shaking a system that had tried to silence a black woman's voice. The videos recorded by the shoppers' phones, once tools of Iris's humiliation, became weapons of justice in the hours that followed. Clips of her ordeal, the false accusation, the public undressing, the planted trinket, flooded social media, shared and reshared across platforms like wildfire. The footage of Iris's defiant call, her voice steady as she revealed her identity as a liaison to the mayor's office, went viral, racking up millions of views overnight. Hashtags bearing her name trended, each post a cry for justice, each share a demand for accountability. The city buzzed with outrage, the clips painting a vivid picture of prejudice laid bare. A black woman targeted, framed, and humiliated, only to rise with a strength that left her accusers reeling. The internet became a chorus, amplifying Iris's truth, turning her personal battle into a public reckoning. The boutique felt the fallout almost immediately. By morning, protesters gathered outside its glass doors, their signs bold and unyielding, calling for boycotts and justice. Shoppers who'd once flocked to its racks now turned away, their wallets closed, their voices raised in solidarity with Iris. Social media posts detailed the store's discriminatory practices, with former customers sharing their own stories of unfair treatment, each one adding fuel to the fire. Sales plummeted, the boutique's once shiny reputation tarnished by the viral videos and the growing tide of public anger. The corporate office issued a statement, a weak attempt at damage control, but it was drowned out by the roar of a community that had had enough. The boutique wasn't just a store anymore. It was a symbol of a system that had targeted the wrong woman. Officer Pierce, too, faced the consequences of his actions. The sheriff's investigation, promised in the heat of Iris's stand, moved swiftly. By the end of the day, Pierce was suspended, his badge and gun already gone, his career now under scrutiny for racial profiling. The viral videos had painted a damning picture. His rush to condemn Iris, his mocking dismissal of her claims, his demand for her public undressing, all laid bare for the world to see. The city's anti-corruption task force, already a spectre in Pierce's mind, took up the case, their investigators poring over his record, uncovering a pattern of aggression that stretched far beyond that Saturday afternoon. The community watched, their outrage channeled into demands for accountability, their voices a chorus that refused to let Pierce's actions fade into silence. But the ripple effects of Iris's courage didn't stop with the boutique or Pierce. Deep within the store's walls, a parallel story was unfolding, sparked by the same fire that had driven Iris to fight back. Two employees, Miguel, a Latino man with a quiet strength, and Connor, a black man who'd long kept his head down, found their own voices in the wake of Iris's stand. They'd worked under the same manager who'd framed Iris, enduring her subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination for months. Snide remarks, unfair schedules, passed-over promotions, they'd swallowed it all, fearing retaliation. But Iris's defiance, her refusal to be silenced, lit a spark in them. They stepped forward, their stories spilling out in a flood of truth, exposing a workplace culture steeped in prejudice. Their accounts, shared with the media and amplified by the same viral wave that carried Iris's story, painted a picture of a manager whose bias extended far beyond one incident. The fallout was swift and decisive. The manager, her backpedaling excuses now irrelevant, faced the consequences of her actions. The boutique's corporate office, under pressure from the boycotts and protests, fired her, her name now synonymous with the scandal that had engulfed the store. Miguel and Connor stood taller, their courage a testament to the power of Iris's example. They weren't just employees, they were witnesses to a system that had thrived on silence, and their voices, emboldened by Iris, helped tear it down. The community rallied around them, their stories adding new layers to the growing movement for justice, their actions a reminder that one person's stand could inspire others to rise. Iris watched it all unfold, her heart a mix of exhaustion and elation. The videos, the protests, the suspensions, they were victories, yes, but they were also a reminder of the cost. She'd been humiliated, stripped, framed, mocked, but she'd fought back, and now the world was listening. The boutique's empty racks, Pierce's fall, the manager's firing, they were all proof that her voice mattered, that her courage could move mountains. But as she stood in the quiet of her own thoughts, Iris felt something deeper stirring. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about one boutique, one cop, one manager. It was about a system, a web of prejudice that stretched far beyond that Saturday afternoon. Her fight had exposed it, but the work was far from over. The cliffhanger loomed, a moment of reflection that carried a promise. This was bigger than Iris, bigger than one incident, and the battle for justice was only beginning. The city had been transformed in the weeks since Iris Hudson's stand in that boutique, a stand that had ignited a firestorm of justice. The viral videos of her ordeal, her public humiliation, the false accusation, the planted trinket, had spread like wildfire, exposing a system of prejudice that had tried to silence a 29-year-old black professional. The boutique, once a glittering hub of fashion, had crumbled under the weight of boycotts, protests, and collapsing sales. Officer Pierce, the cop who'd stripped Iris of her dignity, was suspended, his career unraveling under the scrutiny of an anti-corruption task force. The store manager and clerk, their lies laid bare, faced an investigation that promised accountability. Two other employees, Miguel and Connor, had found their own voices, exposing workplace discrimination and toppling their racist boss. Iris's courage had sparked a movement, a ripple effect that shook the city to its core. But the story wasn't over. One final chapter remained, a return that would cement Iris's legacy and deliver a shocking, unforgettable ending. Weeks later, Iris stood before the same boutique, its glass doors no longer a gateway to humiliation, but a testament to her triumph. The air was crisp, the sun casting a golden glow over the street, a stark contrast to the cold fluorescent lights that had illuminated her ordeal. The boutique had changed. Its signage was new, its windows free of the protest signs that had once lined them. Lawsuits, sparked by Iris's story and amplified by the viral videos, had nearly bankrupted the store, forcing a corporate overhaul. New management had taken over, their mission to rebuild not just the business, but its reputation. Iris paused at the threshold, her heart a mix of trepidation and resolve. She wasn't here to relive the pain. She was here to reclaim her space, to walk through those doors as a woman unbroken, a symbol of dignity and resilience. As Iris stepped inside, the atmosphere was different, transformed. The new staff greeted her with warmth, their smiles genuine, their voices free of the suspicion that had once shadowed her every move. Shoppers glanced her way, not with judgment but with recognition, their eyes carrying a quiet respect. Word of her story had spread far beyond the city, her name now synonymous with courage, her face a beacon for those who'd faced similar injustices. The boutique's racks, once empty in the wake of boycotts, were slowly restocking, but the air carried a new energy, one of accountability, of change. Iris moved through the aisles, her fingers brushing the fabric of a dress, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. She wasn't just a customer now. She was a force, a woman who'd turned her pain into power and inspired a community to stand with her. The community's support was palpable, a living, breathing force that had rallied around Iris in the weeks since her stand. Outside the boutique, people gathered, not to protest this time, but to celebrate. They held signs with her name, their faces alight with admiration, their voices a chorus of solidarity. Social media buzzed with tributes, posts hailing Iris as a symbol of resilience, a black woman who'd faced down a system and won. Local organizations invited her to speak, to share her story, to inspire others to raise their voices. The viral videos, once a record of her humiliation, had become a rallying cry, their millions of views a testament to the power of her truth. Iris stood in the boutique, surrounded by this new reality, her heart full with a mix of gratitude and determination. She'd been targeted, stripped, framed, but she'd risen, and now the world was listening. In the quiet of the boutique, Iris paused, her mind drifting to a reflection that encapsulated her journey. They had stripped her of her clothes, her dignity, her agency, but in the end, they had stripped themselves of power. The manager, the clerk Pierce, they'd wielded their authority like a weapon, but Iris's courage had turned it against them. Their lies had crumbled, their positions lost, their actions exposed to a world that demanded justice. Iris's stand hadn't just reclaimed her own voice. It had dismantled the system that had tried to silence her, proving that power built on prejudice was no match for resilience rooted in truth. Her reflection was a beacon, a reminder that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about standing tall, about speaking out, about reclaiming your place in a world that tried to push you down. The boutique's new staff approached Iris, their faces warm with respect, offering assistance not out of obligation, but out of genuine admiration. Shoppers nearby whispered her name, some approaching to shake her hand, their eyes shining with gratitude for what she'd done. The community's embrace was a shield, a reminder that Iris wasn't alone. Her story had sparked a movement, inspiring others like Miguel and Connor to speak out, to challenge the systems that had oppressed them. The boutique, once a place of pain, was now a symbol of change, its new management a testament to the power of accountability. Iris's heart swelled with elation, a fierce joy that came from knowing her fight had mattered, that her voice had echoed far beyond that Saturday afternoon. But Iris's reflection carried a deeper truth. one that lingered as she stood in the boutique's transformed space. True justice, she realized, wasn't just about the punishment of those who'd wronged her. It wasn't just about Pierce's suspension, the manager's firing, or the boutique's near collapse. It was about reclaiming your voice when the world tried to silence you, about standing up and being heard, about inspiring others to do the same. Her story was a call to action, a challenge to every person who'd ever been targeted, diminished, or dismissed. The boutique was just one battleground, but the war was larger, a fight against a system that thrived on prejudice, a fight that Iris's courage had helped ignite. The cliffhanger had resolved, but her legacy was a hook for the future, a promise that her voice, and the voices of those she'd inspired, would continue to rise. If Iris's triumph has you inspired, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss more stories of courage and justice. Iris's fight changed everything, and her legacy will leave you thinking long after this story ends. Iris Hudson's story wasn't just about one woman's fight. It was about a movement, a spark that lit up a city and beyond. As a black professional, a liaison for the mayor's office, she'd faced a world that tried to silence her, but she'd emerged as a symbol of resilience, a voice that refused to be ignored. Her return to the boutique was a closing chapter, but her impact was a beginning, a call to every person to stand up, speak out, and reclaim their power. True justice, as Iris knew, was about more than punishment. It was about the strength to rise, the courage to be heard, and the power to change the world.